Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming out to the final lecture in the Experiential Learning Series. Ginny Ratsoy is away, so she asked if I would host today. I'm Pam Erickson. I am a fourth-year English major and Ginny's service learning student, and I have been really happy to attend this amazing lecture series as part of my course. Before we get started, I would like to remind everyone to please sign the attendance sheet and fill out a brief survey. Today, Paul Clark from the School of Business and Economics and Florriann Fehr and Michelle Funk from the School of Nursing will be talking about something I find very exciting, intercultural and interdisciplinary projects. I'm a student tutor at the Writing Center, and I meet with some international students with varying degrees of English proficiency, and it's pretty great when we find ways to teach and learn from one another. In an increasingly diverse world, cultural sensitivity and effective communication have become crucial, and those working in both nursing and business encounter cultural diversity regularly. The School of Business and the School of Nursing are collaborating to raise awareness about differences in cultural communication styles and social etiquette. They are connecting students from both disciplines with the goal of increased mutual understanding and cultural awareness. Please welcome Paul Clark, Florriann Fehr, and Michelle Funk.
All right, well, welcome and thank you for coming. I'm Florriann Fehr, and this is Paul Clark over here, Michelle Funk sitting behind, and we'll grab her once in a while when we're talking. Really, thank you very much for having us to speak with you today to share an adventure that we have been experiencing, a collaborative effort that I think started back in the spring. We kind of met, and it just evolved from there. And we were thinking of ways of how to raise awareness with culture within our courses, and somehow figured out that we had some mutual learning abilities that we could share. And this is what we're going to talk about today. A learning activity that we put together, and the journey, the process, and some reflections afterwards. We did collect some data along the way, and we're still going through it. It's quite, there's quite a lot of data to go through. And so you're getting some initial sort of reflections and findings, and over the next few months we'll develop more and hopefully publish a paper or two out of it too, right? A little pressure there on the peers. Basically, the merge of learning occurred between the School of Nursing and the School of Business and Economics. And I will speak on behalf of the nurses, and Paul can jump in as well at any time with the School of Business and Economics. Okay, thank you. So our goal was to share a common learning interest about skill development. And in nursing, Michelle Funk and I teach a relational practice course, second year level. And the course is all about basic bedside manner, exploring our communication abilities, and considering culture and all the aspects around communication. And in that course, we try to bring up different case studies, do some simulations and role plays, and oftentimes it's kind of challenging because culture is so complicated, and so we're always looking for creative ways of how to do that. And it was just so great that this spring I bumped into Paul, and he offered to share a sort of reciprocal learning experience with his students, and he'll talk about that in a bit too of who was involved. But right away, all these great ideas happened, and we developed some mutual learning appreciation and common themes. So both of us realized that our BA students and our BSN students all share some very diverse areas of learning, and they all need skills in working with diverse groups. As well, they require skills in cross-cultural communication, and some of the basic skills involve looking at social etiquette and what is polite and respectful and different, and how can we do that, and just having a general broad understanding of communication itself. So we were coming in with that sort of mindset and thinking about how can we develop some learning activities that can cover some of these very complicated contexts. So Paul developed a very interesting assignment on his side, and I developed with Michelle an assignment on our side, and there were some common overlaps and also some parts that had to fit with our own courses as well. So I'll let Paul first share what he designed for his part, and then I'll talk about mine and how we ended up merging these two assignments together.
Okay.
You want to move the camera on Paul. A little pressure off of me.
So the course is a 300-level international business course, which requires the students to gain an understanding of differences internationally in a number of areas, politically, socially, in particular culture, and economically. So there's probably maybe half the course around those general topic areas. And the challenge, as we all have, is bringing the material in the case studies in the textbook to life. So with Florriann's help, we were inspired to use the students, in fact, as carriers of their country's culture and political knowledge. In particular, I had 120 students in this course over 3 sections, and it was interesting that a third of them, almost to the decimal point, were from Saudi Arabia, a third were from China, or Taiwan, or Hong Kong, Greater China, and a third were from here, domestic Canadian students. So with that combination, it was a good opportunity to, again, draw the material from the textbook and allow the people from China or Greater China to discuss concepts with people from India. Similarly, the person from Canada was able to be exposed to perspectives from people sitting at their table with others from India and China as well. So it was a wonderful opportunity to blend.
So with the School of Nursing, I spoke with our students, and Michelle spoke with her students. We had 40 plus students each, so 2 groups. And we had general learning objectives to start off with, and then a particular assignment, which I'll show you in a little bit. And basically meeting up with Paul's students and thinking about, critically reflecting on their communication and cultural considerations of how they presented themselves, how they shared their knowledge, and the way they asked certain questions and gained information back, validating it. So really taking into account what were they coming to the table with related to their culture and their ability, and then critically reflecting on what it would be like to work with another culture as a nurse, just gleaning from the experience of having a face-to-face interaction. So essentially, we created interview-like assignments from both sides for them to meet with some mutual learning objectives, but then they also had specific stuff afterwards to write about. But always thinking from our part in the nursing world, how would this relate to your practice? And really considering the cultural piece, which was fascinating because a lot of our students from the nursing side had no idea what culture they would meet, and were really quite nervous at first about this. So when we decided that we wanted to have these 2 groups meeting, I'm going to call them 2 groups, the business side and the nursing side, we laid out some foundational sort of rules up front with our students. All the interactions would be confidential. They would take notes and write things down, but no names attached. We didn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable or vulnerable. And especially, you know, because we had some laid out questions already, but sometimes people end up sharing more than they want, and they could take that away if they felt like it. And as well, meeting in a mutually safe place. There was no expectation to go off campus. It could happen right here during the daytime. Like we spoke about all of those sorts of things up front. And it was meant to be a short moment, maybe 15 minutes of meeting and covering some basic information and then reflecting on it afterwards, right? And as well, we had permission from the nursing students to give the emails to the business students first so that they would contact the nursing students. The nursing students had all hands down said, yes, we don't mind giving our emails out, but you know, how about we let them contact us first? That's how it initially started.
Because we had one challenge to begin with, and
Yes.
that is how to get these students to meet.
Right. Yes, we had to sort of all, you know, this happened way back in the spring, planning all this. How can we make this work? Because we have such a large amount of students from various backgrounds, different schedules. Well, how can we make it work in a you know, a more clear way and without too many kinks? But yeah, so we started off with business students making the first contact. And I have a star beside our PowerPoint because we had to revise that quite quickly. We realized that not everybody was on the same page, and we have various different ideas about time and commitment and who knows what else. There's a lot of uncertainty there, which we're still exploring when we go through our data. And we have to put a caveat out there. Our groups were quite large. From the nursing side, we had them in partners. And from Paul's side, I think you had 3 students.
3 students.
And we tried to keep them from the same section so we weren't mixing it up too much so they knew each other. But it was at first a very interesting experience, just the process of actually having the interview occur. So just a little hint out there if you ever plan to do this exercise to consider some of these steps. And then, of course, we didn't want them missing class time either. That was a very important piece. This was not to disrupt class time. It was treated as if you were going to do research for an assignment, in the library or off-site. So it was considered like doing your regular research and homework after class, right? So from the BSN point of view, we had 81 students, I believe, that were interviewed, maybe 1 more or 2 more than that. And they were interviewing others, because the title of our relational practice course is relating to others. Others meaning someone different from yourself and trying to learn to work with various different aspects of a human being. So we called them others, and it could have been anybody. And they each individually had a paper assignment attached. So even though they went in partners to talk to another group or some others, they still each had to write a paper on their own. And basically, and I have some of the questions that they had to cover in a minute here, but basically they were writing about the interview process, the interaction process, looking at how they pulled in their cultural perspective, and they had to go into the literature as well and read about the culture they ended up interviewing, whatever they identified the culture as, and relate it back to their nursing practice. What did they learn from these interactions, or what did they think about? How would they do things differently if they had to do it again? It was a lot of self-reflection, but it was with real people, right? So that's what made it so exciting. And peers from campus, really, so yeah.
So as I mentioned, I had 120 students, and we tried to align sections so that there'd be at least familiar faces and easy connections made between the business students. For example, they could see each other after class or before class. As I mentioned, it was usually 2 international students and 1 domestic student. And they did not do an individual assignment. They had a group assignment done to do. It wasn't very long. It wasn't arduous. It was, I think, 12 pages. And they were asked to draw a certain number of concepts from the textbook.
And to be fair, I mean, Paul had quite a few more students than us, and it was 1 teacher versus 2 teachers with 40 students each. So that would have been really hard if he had. Well, that would have been a lot of work if everybody had an individual paper. I was thinking a lot of marking.
Which I did, actually, I wanted to avoid. So
yes, for sure, I understand.
Yeah.
So, going into this, we had some amazing discussions. The students, from the nursing perspective, the conversations in the classroom before they met with Paul's group were very excited and nervous, of course, because you're meeting strangers, but that's what nurses do. We meet strangers all the time, so let's work on that. We explored biases. We explored thoughts about how do you meet somebody who you've never met before? What does respect look like? How do you build trust with somebody? You're asking some pretty interesting questions. How would you get the answers? We talked about what kind of backgrounds people had with other cultures, and found that some had exchange programs and we had traveled a little bit, but the majority, at least from my class, and I think Michelle agrees with me, had not really even left the country before. So this was kind of exciting. And what really caught me by surprise was that many had not made any friends with international students on campus or even talked to anybody from an international side of things. And so there was a lot of curiosity, a lot of excitement. And for once, I think I had a good assignment happening here. I was like, good, they're going to be engaged and continue on. And really like I said, little to no exposure with Theory World or ESL students. So from our side, this was pretty exciting. From your side, Paul?
All of that. And even though the students are in the same section, and there's different cultures in any given section, they don't, unless they need to, intermingle. As you know, they separate. So they were, through this assignment, required to talk to other people from different cultures, which was unusual for them.
And one thing that you had mentioned too afterwards, a lot of them already had group assignments going on with other courses, so this was an additional piece.
Yeah, similar to nursing, a characteristic of the School of Business is, I think, the vast majority of courses have group assignments, so the students are really almost overwhelmed. If they've got 3 to 4 people in any given group and they've got 5 of these going on in any given semester, there's a lot of finding the best ways, as we'll talk about, to get things done, which aren't always the best learning opportunities.
Oh, this one I already put. I think I went backwards. I apologize. So the students from the nursing side, again, looking at the objectives of the learning activity and the course itself, we put together some questions that we were thinking not too sensitive, but could gain a lot of insight from any angle. So they were quite open questions, and they could reword them in whatever way worked for them. And I think a few of them reflected in their papers later on that they really had to change the wording around because of language barrier and cliches and all these kind of interesting pieces, which is all about learning how to talk to others. So it worked out really well. But generally the questions were about the mannerisms that were acceptable or unacceptable for the other students. And some of the students felt comfortable sharing and some didn't, and that was all part of it. As well, a really, really great question that received a lot of good reflection was, if you were to visit the student's home for dinner, what social etiquette or behaviors should you use to fit in? And that opened up all sorts of interesting angles about culture, about family, about what home life is like, and the nursing students just love that. That part of the information gathering was very insightful, and again, they could relate it back to their practice, so it was quite a useful question. As well, what kind of behaviors did the business students think maybe what did I have here? What behaviors would they have to have around the family members? And in that, we had some interesting discussion about gender and age and if you're married or not and all those sorts of things. So it really fit with some of the literature that we had been reading in the class as well. And the social etiquette that the student would expect if their family members were in the hospital. And again, relating to nursing practice. So some very interesting conversations. Some of them went on, and the nursing students just gleaned so much information that I think they would have never really asked anyone about within the school experience if they weren't formally told to ask as an assignment. And then of course some of the fun question about Canadian behaviors and manners, and even hearing from their own fellow domestic business students from Canada. They were having an interesting conversation about manners and finding out that even as individual Canadians, we all have different expectations. And so again, it was just some deeper level learning that occurred just by asking a few questions. Right? Now, did I put your assignment up here, Paul? I might not have. But yours was generally
similar, although I tried to make it more oriented, as I mentioned initially, around political differences between the countries, economic differences, and then ultimately also social and cultural.
Right, again, because we had these mutual kind of skills that we're trying to develop in our courses with our students, so yeah. So the process itself of actually meeting was probably the biggest challenge. The assignment, after they gathered the information, was very enriching and full of insight, and it ended up being a very positive experience, but the beginning part was a little bit hard. We had some big surprises. We had only expected them to meet once, and some of our groups met 2-3 times, and some are becoming friends, and so they're actually doing something a little even more positive, and they're making connections much deeper than we ever anticipated. there were some interesting things that they tried to do to communicate clearly, and apparently there's all these translation applications you can have on your phone, and they quickly immediately discovered that there's all sorts of communication cliches and slang words and things that don't really translate very well on these apps. So they found that they actually took longer to work with the apps than try to figure out with charades and nonverbal communication, which was quite comical to read about the frustration of these apps should work, but they don't. And then the Canadian nurses themselves found that the questions they were being asked by some of the business students, even though we did send the assignments to each other and to the students, so each group of student knew what the assignments were of the other, they found some interesting lack of knowledge. They were unaware of the political parts of Canada, and they found that they couldn't answer all the questions. They had to go back and read up on it and then have another meeting. And yes. We also experienced some domestic clashes, which was something we had not thought of at all, between the students from the same country. I guess there was a misinterpretation maybe somewhere in there about what was expected in the assignments, and from what the nursing students were sharing, they found the domestic students from the business side were kind of able just to do the assignment without the nursing students contributing. And they could get away with that somehow. And that was a little bit of a surprise too. But now that we look back at it, maybe it's not a surprise. It sounds like survival mode to me, and very creative scheduling. But yeah. And ultimately, some just amazing positive experiences where maybe they read in the literature that it's not okay to shake hands or whatever, and they found out that, wow, everybody's trying to meet halfway and communicate and bridge communication in a very respectful manner, and everybody was generally very polite, and that seemed to surprise some of the nursing students at least. And but at the same time, would it? I don't know. So we had some great conversations and excellent reflections in our assignment side. Any other surprises from your side that I missed?
Building on that idea, by being pushed together, I think they were doing things they hadn't planned on doing.
Yes.
So it was interesting for them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we're still going through, like I said, the data, but definitely. Anything you wanted to add, Michelle, or we're good? We're good? Okay.
I think when you were speaking earlier about the apps.
Yes,
One of
the telephone apps.
Yeah, next time we're doing questions, the mannerisms was a big one. Mannerisms doesn't translate.
No.
It's just, it's like jargon almost. To us, it's quite,
Yeah.
but mannerisms was a difficult one, and I
Yes.
feedback from my students in their papers, which is really, from a nursing perspective, interesting because we throw jargon as nurses around all the time. And something as simple as what the majority of the population understands in Canada at least, or English speaking, what mannerisms is. But for us to not, that was very reflective for the students. It's like, oh, I better be very careful when I approach a bedside or speak with a family in our care, how I'm going to use my words. So that was interesting for me.
And the nursing students as well, because we were talking about culture right from the get-go, they realized, oh, there's a nursing culture within our own little world, and we have our own words and our own language and our way of being, and that was a neat little reflection as well. So yeah. So I'd say that the biggest challenges, and I put a picture of Paul. You look a little different in this photo, but this is the one I got off of the TRE website, Paul. I think. I'm not going to say anything, but you look. I'm just kidding. He wants to defend himself because and again, it was just funny when we were going through the findings because we had, of course, an evaluation of how this assignment went, and the students wrote down some feedback for us on both sides, and there was an interesting challenge just to meet up, that initial meeting, and a lot of anxiety, I think, I was hearing it a lot from the nursing side anyway, because I guess, we have a cohort, a steady cohort that have grown up together, and they have deadlines, and 2 days a week they're off campus in the hospital, and so they've got this very tight schedule, and as nurses in general, we're always on timelines. It's just what we ingrain in their culture, that, you know, the medications are due at this time, you have to do this at that time. And so they had it in their minds that the interview would happen on a certain week. And then it didn't. And so then the next week, and then it didn't. And it just, and there was some anxiety building up for that part. Again, because that is sort of how the culture is in the nursing world, I guess. And so yeah, we had some initial kind of frustration, I'll say it frankly. And then language barriers. We were expecting issues with language. That was the whole part about it, that we wanted to have the exposure to English as a second language. How do you speak with somebody who might be struggling and needs to validate with you and give you feedback? How do you get that feedback clearly and truly? And so, I mean, we were expecting challenges there too. And that was exciting in itself. And I know they tried to use the translation apps, and they didn't work very well. That was all part of it. They wanted, nurses want validation. We talk about feedback all the time in our program about finding out, did we understand what you said? And they weren't getting it all the time. They would send emails back and forth, but didn't feel like they were truly getting the feedback they wanted. But again, that is a cultural piece in the world of nursing, right? And in the real world, do we always get feedback from our patients? We try to, but not always. So this was a lovely learning experience. Building trust. Not sure if they had trust or not. They were asking some questions. I felt they were safe questions, but not always feeling that the trust was there. And just life schedules in general. We're busy. So, I mean, all of these challenges are not too much of a surprise to me. I think this was all part of the learning, and we can work some of it a little bit better next time. But any big challenges here that I'm missing, Paul? Or
other than that, it was a perfect living example of people that aren't that concerned about time, people that aren't that concerned about the details of the assignment.
Yeah, it's true, right? Two cultures clashing about timelines. I mean, this is real world stuff. We have some business students that are here having a great time, and I had said to Paul, you know, a lot of learning happens most of the learning happens outside the classroom. If I were coming from another country and learning at a university, learning a new language, exploring, I mean, why would I be in the classroom? I want to be out on campus. I want to be out exploring, going to Sun Peaks, playing golf, trying out the other cultures. So I can't expect someone visiting from another country to keep to the timeline, like our nursing students that are under the thumb of the instructors, right? It is a whole different style of learning and highly acceptable. And it's rich, so, right? So I don't think you need to defend your business students. I think they were just being who they are, and we're so lucky to have had them. It's like a living laboratory on campus, isn't it? So we're really lucky. The big reflections that we got out of this, going back to the main objectives about exploring their sense of communication and cultural awareness, some of the things that were very interesting in their assignments were about how they really struggled they were feeling they were open-minded when they arrived for the interview process, but then certain types of information would come out and they were triggered and they were really struggling with, how do I keep an open mind without sharing my opinion or offending or disrespecting? Like, they were really working on that in their heads, which was great because that's what nurses need to think about all the time, right? So that was fantastic. They were surprised by some of the off-the-record responses. So when they were writing notes, they would ask some questions, and some of the students would say, well, I want to share something with you frankly, but don't write it down. Don't put it in your assignment, or don't tell your teacher. And they were about maybe a dark side of some sort. But it was fascinating because, again, this relates to the real world of our patients might say something to us when family members are around, and then as soon as the family members leave, the real stuff comes out, right? And so this was great. It was great that they witnessed this and experienced this as well. Cutting corners. How did that go for you, Paul? Did you see some corners being cut on your side? Because just curious.
In hindsight, not surprisingly, a lot of it was done internet-based research. There was a way to get around the face-to-face often. So there was a lot of very distant information being given, which wasn't really the essence, the objective of what we were trying to do. So I have to modify it somehow so that it's pulled down to the interpersonal level.
Yeah, and we have some ideas that we'll share with you guys on that. We've got
Yeah.
some really good ones. There's no way they can cut corners. Well, they'll find a way, but.
And sending
again-
endless copies around by email.
Oh, yeah, yes. You got a lot of emails too, by the way, didn't you?
Yeah.
This round?
Yeah.
Yes. What other part? I think what really came through, which was really neat for the students, at least from the nursing side, was how important family and culture and religion and all that is to people. It doesn't matter what country they come from, but there was this theme constantly, this rich theme of just the values that people are bringing here on campus. And I think that students really, at least from the nursing side, had a new level of respect. Yeah, that was really,
And
really
that's
powerful.
that's a big characteristic that's different between North American students and students from other parts of the world that do come from these more religious-oriented cultures.
Absolutely. So you had some reflections when you were going through your assignment.
Yeah, we haven't gone through the actual research questions, but it was very interesting to see the way the classroom behavior of students changed. For example, an Indian young man talking to a young Chinese girl and laughing. It was really, really neat to see those kind of interactions, which I'm sure were contributed to by this assignment.
You had something about the female domestic. Oh, it was the domestic students as well were kind of taking on some of the work, maybe.
Yeah, Robin Reed made a presentation about a month ago about how in these kind of intercultural assignments, often it's the domestic students that are taking a lot of the actual completion of the project on because of their superior English writing skills. And that is where a lot of the concern came. They felt as though they were again being burdened with another project that they've got to finish, they've got to get right in order to get through the course, and it's just going to benefit the international students who aren't pulling it along. So there's a way to, I think, somewhat mediate that tension.
And we had this discussion in our nursing class beforehand, that we wanted everybody to have an equal chance because we understood there was going to be some possible language barriers, English as a second language, and we didn't want anyone to be feeling left out. We wanted to be in a very inclusive interview process. So I know the students from the nursing side were struggling with that because the domestic students from the business side seem to fall into the habit of, I'll be the one to speak on behalf of everybody. Right? Because there seems to be this phenomenon of them helping out with assignments a little bit more so than the rest. So what Paul had identified was actually happening at the interview level and noticed. And again, the nursing students were trying to be as equally as possible with everybody. And that's how we ended up having some extra interviews, because then they would meet up again with the more international students in business afterwards to talk a little more, to get a little bit more information and give them more time to reflect and translate as well. So, yeah. So we are looking at ways to have a similar playing field, and that's part of this whole process, right? Always working to make things better. So some changes based on what we've experienced thus far, and we're still reflecting, we're still going through all of this, is to look at the process of how they came together, the actual interview itself. I think the questions were amazing. We definitely got a lot of, at least from the nursing side, we got a lot of insight, and the students gave us a lot of positive feedback on the assignment itself. I think the initial piece was the meeting itself. How can we meet and not have these frustration moments of, it's taking weeks before they're contacting me to have this meeting. We just want to meet. It sounds exciting, right? So that's one piece.
Mm-hmm. And valuing people's experience with other people's, like the process of the assignment, almost as much as the eventual completed paper, I think would really be beneficial.
Absolutely, yeah. I had shared with Paul, in our class, we have a group charter that we cover in the first week. Because we have group assignments and it is a course on communication and working with others, we right away off the bat talk about group dynamics, group process, and how do you work with others on a team? Because nurses do not work alone. They're part of a team. And so we're trying to ingrain this mindset in them early on. And we had our students get together and actually develop write down their strengths and weaknesses and their goals and how do you deal with conflict within your group. And so I think that might be one part that you're planning to add on your side of things, just to have that discussion within a group of, I think that, like, what will each person do as taking part and being equally involved in the project. And, yeah. So it's an idea that we're working with at this point, so that some of those group dynamics are a little more fair.
And peer evaluation.
Yes, absolutely.
To moderate the...
Yeah. And we want to have it, I mean, the nurses glean so much out of this, and my worry is that the SOBI students, the students from business, are not getting as much out of it. Because the nurses seem to get a lot out of it, but it needs to be reciprocal and fair, and equally as exciting on your side as well. So we're looking at ways of enticing the business students more into it.
Yeah.
So we've come up with two different things, two different angles at this point. We're thinking of having, and we're not sure about the logistics of this, but we're looking at, we've got 2 courses, 2 sections in nursing of 40 students each, and then Paul, and there'll be another one on board next fall with you, with various sections.
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially. And so we're thinking about having a couple of hours, it might be in the evening, where we can find a mutual time that everybody is not in class, and it's mandatory we all meet together. And this is, hi, how are you? It might be in the gym. I don't know. We haven't thought about that far yet. But the idea of having that first meet and greet of, these are the nursing students, these are the business students, this is the plan, and just see how that pans out. I think it'll really break a lot of the ice, and as well gain trust a lot quicker. And yeah, and I think that'll be a very interesting piece to add to this whole experience in itself, a very engaging piece. So we're looking at that as an idea. And we've also gained feedback from the students about this too, at least from the nursing side. I've been reading through our evaluations and the feedback, and they would like to do this too. So it's not my idea, I have to say. I'm plagiarizing somebody else's idea here. And as well, Paul had thought about this, having a crisis scenario of some sort that the business students would evaluate the nursing students on. So it might be, you had some ideas.
For example, the way the nurse, based on her intercultural literacy, is able to communicate with the Chinese student or the Indian student over a crisis like, for example, the death of a family member or a severe injury or something like that.
Yeah.
So kind of having the knowledge shared and then watching how the nurses respond to the other cultures based on the information they hopefully have picked up. Or something like that. Just something to, for the business student, maybe it'd be also about learning about the healthcare industry in a different country.
So yeah, we're looking at how really to have the business students feel like they're taking ownership of this assignment much more as well.
And that
they're getting out of it.
The nurses are coming.
Yes.
They have something
Absolutely.
that is similar to the way the Chinese student, the Indian student, they're all bringing this contribution.
So yeah, it's a work in progress. So we've gotten so much out of it, much more than I think we ever imagined in the beginning, back spring when we were putting this together. And yeah, so that is where we're at this point. And we're hoping to...
You can't leave, Kyra. You're integral to the success of this in
we're
the
hoping
future.
to, in March, at an international conference, we've submitted an abstract to share more detail on this because we're still deep in the data. So.
Thank you.
Yes,
That
thank
was
you.
really interesting.
And we absolutely would love to hear some feedback from you, just from hearing us go through this journey. If you have some insight to share with us on how to make this process even more interesting, we're up for it. Absolutely, about student engagement and creative ways. And I think I put a little bit of literature there, just sort of some background of how we're working on
Thank you.
student engagement.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes or so for questions, if anybody has any questions or comments.
In general, was the student feedback that this was a good assignment, that they felt they got a lot out of, or in the end, what were their comments about the whole experience?
They were generally of two themes. One theme was, yes, very positive. Yes, it was really worthwhile. And I think that came from domestic and international students. The second theme was, I'm doing all the work. I'm doing all the work, which was largely a domestic observation.
So the question is, how do you get those international students to buy into the value of that assignment?
So the
Because-
international students bought into it. I think it was more the domestic students from the business side were feeling they were doing all the work, right? Is that what you're kind of saying?
Well, all the work in this case is finishing the written report, this 10 or 12 page written report. Some reports were
For the
15.
reasons you mentioned.
Yeah.
But so how,
That's-
how would it work normally if it was, say, 4 Canadian students? Wouldn't the end result, the writing, be left to one student? Anyway?
Often, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why he's thinking of having a charter up front about group dynamics and the expectations from each other, and then a peer feedback piece. So a certain percentage of your assignment might be on rating the involvement of all of them in the group and giving feedback
Right.
related. So really being accountable, I think.
Yeah, so if this is worth 25% in total, maybe 15% for the paper and 10% for the peer evaluation.
So whoever it is, whether domestic or international, if they want to just sit back and not do that much, it's going to affect their grade because of their
Absolutely, yeah. And again, it fits with the world of business and with nursing as well. Teamwork is so important, right? And so it's an added piece. Of course, we have this cultural theme that's embedded all the way through this assignment, but teamwork is a
Well,
huge
and the old
component.
adage, you're only as strong as your weakest link,
Yeah.
is so apropos,
Yeah.
something like that, or in nursing.
Yes. And you see, we didn't have that twist in other, because the actual assignments for nursing, they were individual. The interviews, yes, they had to get together and work as a team to talk to the business students, but ultimately they had an individual assignment each. So we didn't have that issue of these dynamics of somebody doing more work than the other from the nursing side. So, yeah. Yes?
Could you comment on how the importance of learning a second language figured into any of the reflection in the discussions?
Hugely. Well, go ahead, you
Because it
start.
wasn't mentioned in anywhere on any of your slides.
English as a second language?
No.
Okay.
Another language as a second language.
Oh, like from the nursing point of view, or
From the
yeah,
domestic student's point of view.
Mhm. Huge piece. Yeah, I mean it's reciprocal, right? Language anyway. So am I getting you right on that? Like,
Well,
want to make sure
I'm just wondering, because it seemed to be more oriented to your, we speak English and they speak something else, but, I think one of the most important ways of gaining cultural sensitivity is to learn another language
Absolutely.
in enough depth that you can get into that mindset.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering where that figures, or if that figures in the students.
I know in the nursing assignment, part of it was how do you bridge care with someone who speaks another language. And so they were learning words, key words like pain, food, toileting, like from the other language. And how would I say it? How would I go about it? How would you like the room set up? So it was even deeper than just language, but meaning behind the language. And how do I verbally come across with that language as well? So that was kind of the type of insight that we were looking for. So definitely, how do you meet somebody and it's not all about English? This is the other language. And the meaning behind the language too.
Did you find that the students expressed any greater interest in getting a deeper understanding of another language as a result of this?
I know at least from the nursing student side, absolutely hands down. We had 100% very positive results from this activity. What was really neat was Paul's students took so much extra time to bring their culture to the students. There were students from your side, from Saudi Arabia, for example, bringing food to the interview to show this is what we eat at my home. This is what we bring when we go visit someone's house. This is the word for this. That was just unexpected and very, just so ultimately over the top. It was great. And Chinese as well, bringing, our Chinese students were bringing different words, showing different herbal medicines and things like that of what they use here instead of aspirin or Tylenol and things like that. So that was kind of a neat way of bridging from that side. Yeah.
But I think it's also a neglected area of this assignment, because I agree that we were saying this is English, this is going to be done in English, and I don't think the domestic students always appreciate the challenges just at that basic communication level.
Mm-hmm.
They don't realize, they forget,
Yeah.
which is too bad. So it is something that we could somehow maybe ask them to memorize 2 sentences in the languages of their group members or something. And just through that.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And then we test them on it later. So say thank you in Arabic. Spell it correctly. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, there's just so many angles that we could take with this assignment, really. And the opportunity of having this phenomenon on campus of diversity is just, yeah, just so much learning here, so much rich learning. So,
How did you get the idea to pair these students?
We were outside the Brown House of Learning over the summer, and Ginny happened to introduce us.
yeah, I was
And
busy with someone else. We're writing a book together, and it just, I don't know what happened. We just started talking.
I said, yeah, I've got a lot of international students, and Ginny and Florriann said, oh, we do simulations in our
Yes.
class. For example, we pretend one of the people in the conversation is from China or India.
Yes,
we
we do.
pretend.
We have this fun simulation, and it is quite popular, but I wanted to try something different because I've done it how many years in a row now? 4 years, 5 years? Where I assign students to a country, and they pick whatever they want from that country culturally, because the country is not a culture. There's cultures within a country, right? And they go by bus, which is an airplane, up to the mall. And they walk around. They've done a little bit of research ahead of time, and they walk around not speaking a word of English or reading English. And they're truly in Canada now. And they evaluate the mall in how would you navigate through the mall for certain things. And I have them explore the bathroom. I have them explore the food court. I have them watch interactions of different people and reflect on that. I throw in some scenarios. So they have like 10 tasks that they have to open up an envelope after they do each one. So they don't know what they're doing. You know, and they're in groups. They're in predestined groups.
So with that in mind, I
Yeah.
thought, holy smokes,
I
you don't have
it's
to
so
pretend.
much fun, but it's a lot of work. It's an amazing stepping stone, though, for all the rest of the semester, because we have this equal playing field of an experience that the students have gone through, and it's simulated, obviously, but it's something, right? And it gets their imaginations going, and they get into the literature, and they talk about it, and yeah. And I throw in scenarios like all of a sudden somebody's having a baby, you're in labor at the mall. What do you do now? And maybe in China, there's a certain phone number you phone. Or maybe you go somewhere. I don't know. Like, they've had to have looked it up, or at least if they didn't know then, afterwards they reflect on it and look it up and try to find out as best as they can. And yeah, it's just a scenario that I tried, and it's just evolved. And I explained it to Paul, and he's like, wow, that's kind of elaborate, and I bet you we could try something a little different. And I'm always open to trying something. I'm a bit of a risk taker, so.
And several years ago at a research project, this is how I came into it, where I had a group of clinical students that were focused on 13 weeks in their second year of end-of-life care, palliative nursing. And we went over to, in conjunction with the ESL department, we went over and interviewed international students. One particular class who was just in their first year level of communication, so it was practice for them to speak with the Canadian students. And we interviewed them about their death practices in their culture. Like, tell me about suicide in your culture, and what's that like? And, so I had a little bit of experience doing this, and when Florriann brought this up, I was like, this, because the richness in the learning for the students is just so immense.
Yeah.
And it stops us, it doesn't stop us, it helps to kind of bridge that divide that's here on campus where we're all in silos. It's like, go across and let's walk down this hallway, because they never go down this hallway here, because that's the international hallway. Let's take a walk down that hallway.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just so impressed that they were meeting afterwards too.
Mhm.
After the actual assignment, some of them are meeting up and they're exploring. And I think there's a group that's going skiing this weekend. I mean, things like that to me that's learning. It's outside the classroom. It's involving others, and that's true engagement. And again, that makes students feel like they are part of a bigger campus culture, and that in itself is a lovely bonus for this assignment. So I'm seeing it getting bigger and grander, and yeah, we're going to keep working at it, I think. if Paul's game for it, of course. Well, it's been just great to share this experience with you. Really, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to see this happen in more, see more interdisciplinary, different cultures working together. Great idea.
Well, come talk to us. We're like the guinea pigs. We'll.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.